Hello everyone, I am your host Alejandro Colindres. Welcome to Series 1 of the podcast, The Road to Champagne, 13 tested principles to drive your career to success. This podcast series will benefit professionals that have room for growth in their career, especially young professionals. We will explore one principle at a time. You can see the framework in the website roadtochampagne.com. It has 3 parts: shape your mindset, build your brand, and be the driver. Today, we finalize part 2, exploring principle number 9, define your brand. Now it's time to bring your strengths, values, and expertise into a cohesive story, your professional brand. Like any product you buy or company you deal with, you also have a brand, whether you know it or not. The sooner you are in control of defining what that brand is and what is associated with it, the better. If you don't define it, other people will define it for you, and you might not like the outcome. A brand helps differentiate you from those around you, colleagues, classmates, competition, etc. There are probably hundreds or thousands of people with your academic record or work trajectory. What makes you more attractive or better suited for the mission at hand? Your brand helps communicate a message that conveys to people what they can expect from you, what your competencies are, and what you bring to the table. It communicates not only what you can do, but how you go about it as a leader, manager, peer, or follower. It also gives you focus and purpose. My personal brand as an employee, to give you an example, is the following: an effective leader and thought partner that solves complex strategic problems to deliver tangible value in the food and beverage industry. Note a few things. Number 1, I state my core strengths, solving complex business problems, which is the essence of strategy and business system improvement. Number 2, I state being an effective leader, which is very high level as it encompasses the ability to lead, be empathetic, communicate clearly, plan, etc. And 3, I am showing focus in the food and beverage industry, since I have been in it since studying food science in Cornell many years ago. I am not explicitly mentioning values in this version of it as I used to before, but they are implicit. To solve complex business problems and lead effectively, some of my values are essential: hard work and diligence, knowledge, intellectualism, and empathy. One more thing, your brand will evolve over time. That is fine, but be strategic on how it evolves and towards what direction. My brand more than 20 years ago was a highly dedicated, fast-learning, results-driven professional focused on managing and improving food quality systems. Although young Alejandro's qualifiers still apply, I choose to emphasize other traits, and my brand is less technical and more business-oriented after business school. But enough about me. This is just an example of what we mean by professional brand. To help me dive into this topic, I am very excited to be joined by Phil Buckley. Phil is a senior change management consultant and executive coach. As you may know, change management is a structured approach to manage the people side of a change initiative in an organization. He is a published author, including Change on the Run, available March 2nd. We met back in Cadbury when I was in New Jersey. He was a vice president of organizational change at the time. Phil has a very well-defined brand, so he's a perfect guest for this episode. You will hear more about his brand, but to me, he's a change management sensei. When I think of managing change, I think of Phil. Phil, welcome to the Road to Champagne podcast. What a pleasure to have you here. How are you today?
I'm great, Alejandro. It feels great to be part of the Road to Champagne podcast. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. Very excited you're here. Phil, your brand statement is a global change management expert who helps leaders and their teams achieve their personal and business goals by providing change expertise and skill building. Tell us about your journey that took you to the current version of Phil.
Well, your question, Alejandro, reminds me of a quote from Drake, the other champagne pappy. And he said, sometimes it's the journey that teaches you about your destination. When I look back on my career, there's a common thread through all my roles, and that is helping people to succeed. I started in retail, actually beverage alcohol and wine, just like you're doing now.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Isn't that great? Yes. And then and counseling a couple on their wedding order to complement their happiness just lit me up. It was just that the ability to make people better. And then I moved to a government agency with a remit to assist entrepreneurs to be successful through strategic advice, through investment, through skill building. It was called the Business Development Bank. In the US, the complement is Source. And then I went to a boutique consultancy that was really all about re-engineering broken sales and marketing organizations. And at that time, it was called re-engineering. But the core of all of them, it really did manifest my personal brand of helping others, although I didn't know it at the time. I didn't even know what a brand statement or a personal brand statement was, but that was the essence. And then through time, my experience, my scope, and even my impact grew, as we do, as we go through our careers. And when I was 28, I left work, actually. It was a big bet. And I went to backpack through Europe for 3 months, something I couldn't afford to do after I got out of college. And, I just had no money, but I never lost the dream to travel and just to sort of broaden myself. And things. And I was at the Versailles train station, out of, I guess an hour and a half out of Paris. And I saw this older couple, and they're kind of struggling in a turnstile, and they'd put their token in, but it half gone in, and this couple was kind of locked in this turnstile. So I went over and helped them out, and they were really nice, and we shared a train ride to Paris together. And he talked about his teenage kids and wanting them to find their inner core, and I think that's what we're talking about with our brand purpose and our brand statement. And he termed it, he called it kind of the inner light inside that was what would be their passion and their contribution to the world. And that's how I view my brand statement and how I've discovered it and perfected it over time, from that time when I managed a group of wine stores to now when I'm helping large organizations and the people within it to succeed. So really, to answer your question, I think that the core is there, but it's refining it. And my level, my scope, my influence has changed, but the essence of Phil and what my brand is has always remained the same.
Great. Phil, so I mentioned the importance of values within our professional brand. Which values are you implicitly incorporating into your brand statement?
The ones that are specifically incorporated and embedded into my brand and my brand statement are service and empathy. Helping leaders and their teams is kind of that core piece of the statement. And it really comes down to, I think, what you teach is really hone in on your brand statement and then switch out words as you grow and as you progress, so that it really does sing to you and what you're trying to do, because those values will guide how you behave.
Yeah.
So definitely service, helping others. Empathy is a big one too. And it's baked into my purpose and to my statement. And a lot of my work in change is helping people, leaders and their teams, overcome the fears to kind of adopt new mindsets and ways of working to be successful. So change is personal. It's really, really personal. And to be empathetic is huge. And I know the changes that we've gone through, there's a lot of personal turmoil. And how do you manage that? And I think that the big marquee, which comes back to your question and the values, is I can help.
That's great, Phil. And I also see how empathy makes you a better change management expert, because you're dealing with people and behavior, right? You're kind of like a business psychologist. And if you don't really understand, who you're dealing with and what they're feeling, what they're going through, what that change means to them and how they're interpreting it, then your job becomes much more difficult. So I think that is a core, or very important value to have to be a successful change leader, right?
No, absolutely. And if I could just add in that raises a great point, Alejandro, that when I'm working with leaders and their teams, that typically the most senior leaders like you have more information than the next level down and then the next level down, because you're managing, you're strategizing, you're setting up the strat plan, and then it goes into execution. And what I find a blind spot for leaders are, if they don't have empathy, is they've already gone through their personal change as they're rolling it out to their team. So if you don't remember what it was like to go through when you didn't know whether you'd have a job and you'd be the head of strategy or not, or someone else would have it, but now you're safe, you lose that compassion and you lose that ability to coach your team to get to the other side, which is really what I think change management is about, but it's also what leadership is about.
That's true. So how do you maintain your brand relevant, Phil? Or in marketing speak, what brand activation activities do you use?
Yeah, I love your question because, there's a bit of paranoia, I think, if you really pride yourself on your brand, because the worst thing, just like a product brand, the worst thing that can ever happen is to become irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's not bad press. It's just that nobody cares or they're indifferent. And it holds true for personal brands too. And so this is a really important part for me and how I manage my brand and how I manage myself professionally and personally. So to answer your question, that when you talk about brand activation strategy, what I do, and this has really helped me, and I don't like doing it because it's no fun, but I have to do it if I want to be my best. And my major strategy is to put myself into situations where my abilities are going to be tested. And I don't know if you've ever been in a kind of a big meeting and the big changes happen. Maybe you went through a merger or a restructure or something like that. Or could it be even personally if you have a church club or a ski club or a surf club or whatever, but something big has changed. I think the self-preservation desire is to lay low and just hopefully and don't be recognized. And therefore you kind of won't test yourself, but you won't get into trouble as well. Completely reverse that around with brand activation for me. And it's like, because if you don't, the danger is to atrophy and you don't even realize it. You think you're at the top of your game and you're not. And I think that frightens me. And I'm don't want that to happen. And, the analogy I make is it's almost like a chess tournament. And like, if you put yourself in a chess tournament, whether you're going to be the best or not. We just watching the Queen's Gambit, so it seems very relevant right now. But but you're going to be tested, right? And you're going to know where you rank with everybody else. And if you want to be the best, and if you want to deliver on your brand promise, you've got to put yourself out there. You've got to be heard. And you've got to take the hits when you're not. What it does for me is it forces me to train to be my best, because if I know I'm going to be tested, I do not want to be less than my best, and I'm going to work really hard. And for me, it's like writing books and articles on change, which really tests my thinking, but it's also testing what my value is with my peers and with the business community. There's always the chance that people do not like to it. And you face that challenge. And that's what I'm doing with Change on the Run. It's a very different book for me. Not everyone's going to like it, but I'm pushing it out with all my heart, and I'm going to test myself. What I also do is I participate in industry panels, communicating on LinkedIn posts. For all your listeners, if you really want to hone your brand, start chatting on other people's comments and get into the conversation. And it's about being heard. It's about standing out from the crowd, and it's being open to criticism as you're constantly honing your brand. And there's no perfect, but it's that destination you do it. And so I always say yes to opportunities to communicate, even when I might be feeling like I want to say no inside, because if I don't test, I don't know. And I'm afraid that I'm not up to my game that I need to be. And even, I started a podcast, to test my ideas with seasoned professionals and experts, including you, Alejandro, which is great, but it's not easy. Fun. That was fun as well. But you're testing how you think. And, you have to be a continuous learner as you teach to stay relevant. And I know a lot of your guests have that same view. And I think it's something I would suggest to your listeners too. You have to, because if you stop learning, you're going to be less relevant. And what I do is I spend, at least 7 hours a week studying on latest trends on change management, on the thinking, what's happening. I do that 364 days a year. I take a day off for good behavior for Christmas, but I have to, even if I don't want to, I do. Because and just one last example is when I started writing Change on the Run, I thought, okay, you've got to do your nights and weekends. You just have to, right? You've written a book. So I stopped watching TV and I stopped watching movies for over 2.5 years. I just said, I'm going to cut it out of my diet because the opportunity cost is I'm not going to get to my goal. So, yes, you have to do it. But then the rewards are there as well.
A lot of great advice there, Phil. And what I'm taking away from your answer is you got to be proactive, you got to be vocal and be heard. You have to continuously learn to stay up to date. And that's something that we saw, in episode 8 when we spoke to Eric. and also get creative. I like what you're doing with your brand. You're blogging, you have podcasts, you have books, you have your consulting company. You're really, spreading the message around. So that's very admirable. Phil, so what advice would you give younger professionals on what they can do to design and manage their professional brand?
Yeah, what I'd say to people and the advice for professionals is really define your core. It's really that essence of the brand, because that's where it all comes from. And I think, as you say, it's like values, strengths, and expertise. If you look at that as the triad of what creates your brand, is really start, dissecting what does that mean for me? Because each one is independent, but when you put them together, I think you've got that magic of the essence of your brand. But you can't do that unless you break it apart to the three and make it happen. Another thing I'd say is, I've done a lot of coaching with leaders in my different roles and also in consulting. And I've seen leaders try to build a brand that, whether it's in expertise they don't like, but they do it really well. They're excellent, but they're not impassioned about it. It's against their values, but, they're making good money. But in all of those three, even though they can fake it and mask it, it's not in their core. Right? They're playing a part that they don't want to be, but they want the rewards that they get if they do it. And it never works. It just never works. It doesn't work internally for them, and it doesn't work sort of on the external projection for it. So my advice would be is really find that what's going to energize you and maximize the power within. And really do take the time to write it down. This isn't just a head exercise. It's a writing or a typing down and a refinement.
Awesome. So Phil, if you could go back in time, what would you do differently in regards to building your brand?
Oh, wow. I wish I could go back in time. Actually, it's funny, Alejandro. Your question reminds me of something I never forgot. And it was someone else who answered a similar question. And it was Alanis Morissette. And when she was asked something like that, it's so funny.
Really?
The things you remember in your life. But she said, I would give myself a big hug and tell me that everything would work out. But I'm not Alanis Morissette, although I did see her in the late 80s in a restaurant, sort of rooftop restaurant called Macaroni in Toronto. But what I would say is, and I think we've talked about this, which has been great, start building your personal brand now. I didn't. I wasted years not even realizing the power of this, and I think I meandered a bit. And I think if I could have taken that advice, then it's almost like saving money, and it's the concept of compound interest. It will pay huge dividends down the road to champagne just by starting now. And again, I didn't plan for my retirement in my investment of my career for years, and it cost me, and I really had to struggle to catch up. And I think at the time I knew kind of my brand attributes, if you call them that, to, the relationship building, coaching, goal setting, tenacity, but I didn't see them as a collective. I was ad hoc instead of being strategic. And so now my learning is it's that focus. So if you can focus and start doing it now and refine, not only will you deliver on your brand when you find out what it is, but you'll lead a lot happier life too.
That's awesome, Phil. And you're confirming why I am including this as one of the 13 key principles, right? Because if you don't really have a professional brand that differentiates you, you're going to have a harder time shining out there in the middle of your crowded field, whatever it is. So to make this a two-way conversation, I'm going to let you ask me a question.
Hey, great. Thank you. Yes, we've talked a lot about success and we've talked a lot about, the right things to do and how that's going to drive us and create our personal brand. And I think in reality, though, in our lives, we're a mixture of things that go well and failures or learnings, however you want to term it. And it's not easy. And so what I'd love to ask you about is kind of the other side of the coin when things don't go well. So my question is, let's say you have your brand promise and it's fine-tuned and it's great. And you mentioned the fact that when you have a brand promise is, people trust you to deliver on that promise. It's a personal commitment and they rely on you to do that. But what happens if you break your promise? You'd fail and you lose that trust of the person or the team. Can you repair the damage and reestablish that trust over time?
Great question, Phil. And yes, your brand statement should be reflecting what you are capable of delivering now. It should not be aspirational, what you're trying to get to in the future. And many brands have gone through that situation that you just mentioned, where their brand is damaged because they damage the trust of the consumers. And one example that comes to mind is Volkswagen. I don't know if you recall, but several years ago in the US, they were caught cheating with their emission tests in order to, just pass and be seen as highly efficient. Would I buy a Volkswagen? I don't know. I think I wouldn't, because I have other options. So that is one example of the trust being damaged in the consumer's eyes. And depending on the severity of the mistake, it could be easily repairable, right? By acknowledging your mistake and discussing how you will fix it and make it better. And hopefully, the consumers or your clients will give you the opportunity to, continue with that relationship. But if it's really a damaging, blow to the trust, it could either take a long time to repair, or you might not fully repair it, right? And I've seen it even with bosses, right? Sometimes they are performing well, they are leading well, and they have one episode where they totally go against their own brand, and then the team loses respect for that individual, and eventually the team starts to evolve and change, and some people leave the team, and it's never the same as it was before. So you have to be very careful in managing your brand and staying on brand. Because if you go off brand, there are certain risks that could be as severe as what Volkswagen went through. But since you're the master of having a well-established professional brand, I also want to hear your perspectives on that, Phil.
Thanks, Alejandro. I really love your answer. And what resonates with me is that, your brand is a point in time, and that, if you take the right steps, you can repair it almost always, unless that sort of aberration or that misstep is so grand that people just can't get that out of their head. So great point. And so many great examples, I think, also with Volkswagen too, that it does take time to do it. And what I would add to that is I would say, yes, with a mea culpa, that you have to say you screwed up. If they don't, and they go, okay, I'm just going to move on, and people will forget, they can't rekindle that brand promise. But if they actually say, I know I screwed up, and this is why I screwed up. And one example is I was working with a leader, and he was two types of people. He was like a bear, really, really, and almost kind of mean, or the nicest guy in the world. And he got some feedback from his team that was brutal, unvarnished. It was like a incredible how people articulated the personal damage he was doing. And what he did is he was going, wow, I just had no idea. So what he did, he said, well, if we're going to go through this change, I've got to change. I got to do something about this. And I said, well, what are you going to do? I got to tell my whole company that I screwed up. I said, are you sure you want to do that? He goes, yeah. So the next town hall meeting, he gets up, and this time, 250 people in the room. It was, broadcast right across North America. So it was huge. So there's a lot of pressure. And what the guy did is I have so much respect for that. He took the flip charts that had the feedback on that he got in this 360, and it was like a workshop. And he got up on the stage and he held up the actual pages, all wrinkled, shaking like a leaf. And he read it to his whole company. Wow. And it was brutal. I cry every night when I come home. I've never felt so demeaned in my life. Like just stuff most people wouldn't share. And you know what happened afterwards? And people are going, yeah, no shock to me. That happened last week. So, this is no surprise. And what happened is that afterwards, people went up and hugged him because he said, I need your help, and I never want this to happen again. And if we're going to be successful, and if I'm going to be a good leader, you got to help me. And it's hard, but that's what it's all about. And people were starting hugging him, and he completely flipped. And it was a success story that has left a huge impression on me ever since.
I love how he didn't ignore the feedback or the problem. He actually faced it and solved it. So that's a great outcome of that story. Phil, so each of our audience members is on their journey to success, trying to get to their champagne. What is the main thing you want our audience to remember when they think about why they should define their brand?
What I would share is that your brand statement makes you feel good because you're excelling in what you define as meaningful work. And mine is different from yours, Alejandro, as everybody who is listening, but it's meaningful for you and it makes you feel good. And if it doesn't make you feel good, change it and keep changing it until it makes you feel good. Because when you've got the right brand statement, it fortifies you and you soar and you feel good and you're in the moment, and then you just replicate it and it's great. And if you don't feel that, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get there. It just means you haven't found it yet. So start asking those questions. And my last thing to say is don't compromise. Life is too short to have the wrong brand statement. If you have the right one, you feel great about your life and it keeps perpetuating as you continue on. So that would be my suggestion and the value of having the right brand statement.
Phil Buckley, thank you for joining me today all the way from Canada in exploring this powerful principle. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
Alejandro, thank you so much for the honor of being on your podcast. And I wish you all the best as your book launches. There's so much good content in it. Can't wait till it comes out and becomes a bestseller.
Thank you, Phil. And thank you for being a beta reader. Now, Phil, how can listeners out there get in contact with you or follow you if they're interested?
What I'd suggest is connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in sort of what I'm doing now, if you could go to changeontherun.com and you'll see sort of the latest activation of my brand statement, which is my new book coming out in March.
Thank you, Phil. Remember, everybody, you can and must take action to start unlocking the power of this principle in your life. It is a critical component of your journey. Without a well-defined, established, and maintained professional brand, you will not stand out in your competitive field. Start building or refining the association of your name with the topic you master. Just like I think of Phil when I think of change management. Define your brand, live up to it, reinforce it, and always invest in increasing your brand equity. It takes time to build a valuable brand. Take care of it and think strategically about how it should evolve. We now complete part 2, and I hope you clearly understand the importance of creating and managing your professional brand going forward. Let's meet again in episode 10, when we will start the third part, Be the Driver. This part is about being in control of your own progress. You don't want to miss it. We will explore how to navigate the power dynamics of your organization and increase your own power and influence, which makes you more effective as a professional. I have another excellent guest lined up for you. Thank you for joining me in this episode. I hope you are inspired by this principle. So cheers to your success on your road to champagne. Please don't forget to visit roadtochampagne.com and join our mailing list to download the framework we are using. If you like this episode, please share it with your friends, colleagues, and classmates. Send your comments via the website's contact page and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Follow Road to Champagne on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn.